Enterotypes are stable clusters of bacteria communities that coexist together. So there are three kinds. Prebiotic, now these are families, bacteroides and Rhumococcus. Now every single one of these have to be fed plants and have to be fed raw plants to create the numbers and the strength and the quality required to strengthen and build your immune system, to create your immune system, and to create healthy emotional and psychological order. Isn't that interesting? I'll repeat it again. Maybe you missed the whole point of this presentation. So these three forms of family bacteria all require, not because we think so, because we know so, raw plant-based food to make sure there's enough numbers of these healthy bacteria, and the polyphenols kill off the bad guys, the pathogens. Remember that? Once you cook the plant, the polyphenols aren't there. Once you cook the plant, the cellulose is a big gathering of mush, as you see. What's the spinach look like raw? Spinach look like cooked. Not going to feed and create the numbers of healthy immune system cells and the numbers of serotonin receptor sites, neurotransmitters that you require, all of us require, right now listening to me, you're using for stability of emotional and psychology. Wow, this is exciting stuff, man. I love this because it's too bad more people don't know this. And it's too bad the powers that be don't care. And it's too bad that this is so profound. You can do this with plants. You don't require anything other than a healthy diet. Maybe that's why it's difficult to find this information. That's why the real truth about health is essential. It's not optional anymore. It's essential. Raw and plant-based. Prebiotic, a genus of the bacteria, phyla, appears to be significantly richer in response to a vegan diet. Isn't that interesting? So, I mean, the reality is, I don't know what to say. I just really don't know. I just wish people would do more research before they had opinions. Raw versus cooked. Fluid, enzymes, phytochemicals, we haven't even touched on them today. I write books for doctors on that. Any of you doctors listening that really want to have a deep dive into what I'm talking about? I wrote a series of academic books for all of we eggheads. It's called Food is Medicine. It really describes what we've learned here since the 1950s, employing in a clinical setting on hundreds of thousands of people, a raw, organic, plant-based diet. And cellulose are the fuel for healthy intestinal flora and fauna, bacteria that means. When molecularly destroying plants by heating, this symphony of propagators are diminished to a pile of lifeless fiber. Bingo, end of story, amen. Now we go over to Prebiotic and we look at the Chinese versus the Indians. Well, the Chinese eat a lot more meat than the Indians do. Now, I'm not saying the Indian diet's a perfect diet and they cook almost anything, but they tend to eat a lot more raw and a whole lot more vegetables per capita than do the Chinese people. So look at how much more the Indians have versus the Chinese. The Indians have in their intestinal tract a little over 13, and the Indians have less than 1%. And by the way, most likely, in the past at least, if not now, those of you listening, don't eat a healthy diet like the Chinese do. You eat something worse than the Chinese diet. So the fact of the matter is, I can't even imagine what a Western intestinal tract is if the Chinese, who eat a lot more plants than we do, even though they're processed and cooked, have less than 1%. Rhumococcus, this is associated with long-term vegetable consumption. Species of this genus are specialized in degrading complex carbohydrates such as cellulose and resistant starches found in plant-based foods. So guess what? I'll bet $1 million when you woke up one day and said, I'm so sick, I'm frightened, I better become a plant-based eater, or you woke up and said, I don't want to get sick and I want to live a long life, I'm going to become a plant-based eater. Your body didn't have enough of this in it. But guess what? I'm telling you right now, we know this to be a fact, that if you consume a raw plant-based diet, in the worst case scenario, within a matter of 90 days, you will have the right amount, providing you're not drinking alcohol, taking pharmaceutical drugs, first and foremost antibiotics and chemo and radiation. You will have this, not in 9 years, but in 90 days. And that's the worst case scenario. When testing people, which we do with a bacterial laboratory, it happens as little as 3 weeks. This is positively associated with low BMI, gastrointestinal problems, and associated with poor lipid profiles. This is how science talks. I'll inverse it. What it really means is, by the way, you don't have a lot of cholesterol if you eat this food, because this particular form of bacteria literally help to eat up fats, bad lipids, cholesterols in your body. Now, you need cholesterol. I'm not saying you don't need cholesterol, but it keeps it at a balanced level. Gut restoration with a plant-based diet. In consuming a modern Western diet, it is like weakening a muscle. Just think of that. You sit around, you don't use your muscle. What's it going to look like? What's your arm? What's your leg going to look like? Pretty bad shape. In this case, the muscle is critical for the absorption of nutrients and the protection of your overall health. By incrementally, slowly but surely, incorporating a range of plant-based foods, you are able to strengthen your gut's ability to digest and absorb nutrients through a healthy and functional microbiome. Boy, simple, profound, powerful, and what I'll say is effective. Understanding fermentation. We've all heard this, we've read it, you probably listened during some of the conferences here, that people who live a long time always are taking higher amounts of good bacteria. Well, historically, we didn't have supplements like we do today. We actually fermented food. I mean, if you look at the Europeans, it's sauerkraut. If you look at the Asians, it's kimchi. And this is something that is in every single culture, dietary culture in the world. The first guy that talked about it, interesting enough, was Louis Pasteur. And old Louis was a really smart guy. On his deathbed, he said, hey, you guys ran with what I said. I didn't say that all diseases were microbial, but they didn't ever write that in the books, because the farms like you to think it's microbial, because they have one resolution for every disease: bomb it and kill it. Without considering you, the host, they're bombing and killing. But that's another story for another day. Pasteur proved that the microorganisms play an essential role in fermentation. So he was the first guy that said these little bacteria, and they didn't know much about bacteria then, that are eating up the cellulose. Aha! Now, was the cellulose feeding it, or was it eating the cellulose? I'm going to have you think about that for a minute. I think it was a combination. It was back and forth of this. This is in addition, he found the unwanted production of some substances, such as lactic acid went away. Imagine that. We want to take away the bad guys, you ferment the food. You want to take away the bad guys. I know that we're now talking about Dr. Gumbry and how he's talking about lectins and all of this stuff. All you have to do is sprout a food. They go away. So the bad guys, the enzyme inhibitors that really are not bad guys, they're what nature put in to plant seeds millions and millions of years ago to protect the plant seed, by the way, so that the animal wouldn't eat the last of that type and the bug wouldn't eat the last of that type. The germination process naturally and gracefully take that away. So the fermentation process takes away the acids that are aggravating and help to create inflammation. Isn't that beautiful? So what this shows us through a beautiful representation is that fermentation and sprouting actually assist the body to get rid of the bad guys and only get the good guys that actually boost the immune system and give you a basis for good thinking and psychology. Prebiotics fill plant-based foods. I am just so sad that many of you have spent hard-earned money on buying prebiotics. All a prebiotic is a plant. Now, this one fact alone is something I want you to repeat to every single person that doubts that you're doing the right thing on a plant-based diet. What feeds the healthy bacteria in your intestine is a prebiotic. We've been mentioning it now 8, 9 times during this presentation, the cellulose. You are actually paying somebody, rather than eating salads, rather than eating plant-based foods, for a prebiotic. And by the way, even if they don't cook them, if they just grind them up and powder them, they're nowhere as close, as effective as would be the raw salad in the plant-based food. So the very essence of the prebiotic are their fertilizing-like quality, made of plant fiber that forces and maintains a diverse microbiome. Eating a diverse range of raw plant-based foods allows you to build and maintain a diverse microbiota and not ever worry about having disease, and let me now add premature aging. What we know is that every single person that's a centenarian and beyond, when they test their intestinal tract, they are harmonious. They are effective. This is why the longest living people, the longest living tribes, in great part, almost always eat plant-based diets or high plant-based diets.